Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Baijayant J. Panda, Member of Parliament from Orissa, who is probably the most articulate voice of the Biju Janata Dal in New Delhi. Welcome to our show, J. Panda.
Thank you.
Now, I will begin with the bigger issue, the big debate today about special category which many states are demanding from the centre, a special category status. Nitish Kumar of Bihar kicked off this debate. In fact, he even mentioned Orissa and West Bengal in this context. He said that if Bihar, West Bengal and Orissa are the three states who need special attention, and whoever gives special attention to these three states will be at an advantage at the centre. So it was a very politically loaded statement. Now, coming to Orissa, what exactly is Orissa's thinking on special category states?
Orissa has been asking for special category status for many decades now, starting from Biju Patnaik onwards. The fact is, let's consider the criteria on which special category status is granted.
Existing, yeah.
Right, existing. It's been there for decades. It started out with our northeastern states, includes Jammu and Kashmir,
hill states,
and all of that. The idea is to give a leg up to those states which are far behind the national average. And there are certain criteria such as hilly states, scattered population.
And having a border, international border.
Now, if you look at Odisha's condition, we have a large part of the state is mountainous with a huge tribal population, which is exactly another of the criterion. Apart from that, we don't have a land border with another country, but we have a very long sea coastline. And we have had illegal infiltration from other neighboring countries for several decades now. So we have exactly the same problems that a northeastern state or a Jammu and Kashmir has. And ironically, some of these states which have had special category status today have much higher than national average in terms of income. And states like Odisha and Bihar are well behind the national average, and they do need a leg up. And there are two reasons why this is, even under the existing criteria, why states like ours deserve it. Number one, that over the last 20 years, a lot of the funding that gets transferred from center to states has shifted away from plain vanilla transfer of funds into central schemes.
Yeah, centrally sponsored schemes.
Centrally sponsored schemes. 60% of the transfer of funds from center to state is now centrally sponsored schemes.
And this is, I believe this has grown from 9,000 crore in the mid-90s to some 2,30,000 crore today.
In terms of percentage, it is now the bulk of the money. The problem is, you have a one-size-fits-all policy for all the states, whether they are very advanced like Punjab or Maharashtra or Karnataka, or very backward like Odisha or some of the other states.
When you say one-size-fits-all, you mean the proportion of loan versus grants, right?
Now, I'm coming to the state contribution that is required to avail of those funds. So in theory, our state gets X amount of money, but in practice, we have to deposit about 25, sometimes 35%.
Even 40% in education.
In education. In SSA, it is 35%.
35%.
Now, the problem is poor states have a very tight budget, and they are not able to put in that 25 or 35%. So that money from center remains in theory. We are not able to draw it and implement it. Whereas the richer states, they have a much bigger cushion. They are able to deposit their state component and draw the money. If we were a special category state, we would be depositing 10% and thus able to avail of those funds which we are rightly entitled.
Grants, right?
No, all states get grants. The point is the ratio.
So,
poorer states are not able to avail of those grants, right? Now, we on our own and other states like Bihar have started pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. Now, Odisha was not growing for decades and was far behind the national average. Over the last 10 years, we've been growing at nearly 10%.
How is this growth rate coming?
Better governance, very simple, much better governance. And the beauty in all of this is, those states which are governing better and are delivering better economic results, like Odisha, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, are even seeing political benefits because these regional leaders are getting re-elected again and again, which is beating the anti-incumbency which is there in India.
That's very interesting,
The problem is, see, even this year, our run rate is almost 9.5% growth rate, which is more than double of the Indian average. But the problem is, we have been backward for such a long time. Our base is so low that even if we are growing at double the national average, it will take us many decades to catch up. And that is simply unfair. And I want to make one more argument.
So you want a leapfrog strategy, right?
That was the intention. The intention was to give a helping hand to the poorer states to at least come up to the national average. But I want to also give you another reason why this is such a critical issue. Particularly in a state like Odisha, the center gets huge revenues and doesn't plow it back into the state. So there is a feeling of extortion.
Because Odisha is mineral rich, so it is giving a lot to the country, but not getting back.
Now, over the decades, Odisha's minerals have been taken out of Odisha. Central investment in Odisha has been limited to one Nalco or one Rourkela steel plant, not the dozens of plants that other states have seen which don't have the resources. But forget, minerals. The local people have not benefited. The local people, in fact, have been exploited in many areas. But even if you take away minerals, let's take the example of railways. Now, the railways earns 14,000 crores of gross income from the state. We expect at least 1,000 crores to be plowed back. Doesn't happen. So it is this extortionate mindset is being resented by the local people, and it is also creating political tensions because of mineral movement, which is what the railways really thrives on. Railways doesn't make up its money on passenger transport. You have mineral transport, industrial transport, and yet where they are making money in a state like Odisha, they are not investing because other states have more political clout. The freight corridor which is coming down from Delhi all the way to Bengal should, by all logic, be extended to Odisha, not being done. In terms of national average of rail track density, we are almost 30% below the national average. Now, you make money from a particular area, that area remains below national average. If you do not reinvest a little bit of that money into that area, is it any surprise that people resent it?
How much is it below national average now, Odisha?
In terms of rail track?
No, in terms of, say, per capita income or something, is it a...
Yes, in terms of almost everything, we are about 25 to 30% behind the national average.
Behind the national average.
Now, we were about 50% behind, but through our own efforts, we have come up to this level. But the point is, if you do not give a helping hand as per the constitutionally defined criteria, I'm not, some states are arguing today about changing the criteria. What I'm saying is, even by the existing criteria which has existed for so many decades, we qualify. Why deny it to us?
So do you, recently the finance minister conceded this point that you're making, that criteria should change, and northeastern states, Sikkim and some other hill states like Himachal, they're way above national average. In fact, they are 3 times the per capita income of, say, Odisha and Bihar. So do you have any idea as to how this is being reviewed, or are there any ideas being shared by the center with you people?
Well, as I said, even if the criteria don't change, we qualify. So even on the existing criteria, hilly states, porous border, scattered population and per capita income below the national average, we qualify. So our point is, whether you redefine the criteria or not, you should not deny something that is justly due to us. Now, as far as the criteria change that is being considered, I'm not sure what they really mean, because no consultation has taken place. But I suppose they mean that if a state has already exceeded the national average in terms of per capita income, then perhaps that needs to be looked at differently. So I don't know what they mean.
We will, Jay, we'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Jay Panda, Member of Parliament from Odisha, on a special category states debate that's going on in our country today. Jay, now, as I said, the finance minister has made a statement in Parliament that the review, that the special category criteria needs to be reviewed. It's obviously outdated because those who have had the status for decades are now way above national average in terms of per capita income, and they are 3-4 times some of the states like Odisha, Bihar, as you said. Now, I interviewed last week. I interviewed Mr. N.K. Singh, who is part of Nitish Kumar's planning board, and he was saying that a new mechanism could be created in the form of some kind of a national economic council, where the prime minister or finance minister or both and the chief ministers could sit together and actually talk about these things. It's time that a consultation happens outside of the planning commission, which is always seen as a very top-down kind of body historically. Now, do you think some such mechanism would be worthwhile creating, like the one you have on GST, where all the state finance ministers sit together and on a much more democratic basis they arrive at decisions?
Well, let me put it this way. This issue has been considered several times. And I think about a year or two ago, Bihar's case was taken up and rejected as found not meeting the criteria. But at the same time, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce examined the issue. And that is such a forum because you have all party representation on a standing committee. And they decided to recommend that Bihar, Odisha, and I believe one other state ought to be given. So discussions have taken place. I would like to point out that these discussions have been going on for decades. Time for talk is over. It's now time for action. You can come up with any new criteria you like, but how do you justify to 42 million people in my state, in Odisha, and millions of others in other states, that here are the criteria, you do actually meet the criteria by any objective standard, yet we will not do it for you. This is pure politics, and that has to change.
Yeah, and in India, one has seen that in the last 15 years at least, there has been tremendous political decentralization, in the sense coalition form of governance has come to stay, and regional parties are growing. Almost it now seems as if the tail will permanently wag the dog. Now, that being the case, I sometimes wonder, why is action not forthcoming? It's understandable that, as you said, for decades the center has been talking about this, but now why can't 4-5 regional parties get together and just put their weight behind some of these issues and just push it through?
In terms of numbers in parliament, I don't think regional parties put together can be considered the tail anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's certain so-called national parties who have actually now become the tail, but continue to wag the dog because they have grown up in a mindset over decades that sitting in Delhi, thousands of kilometers away from remote villages in different parts of India, they know best that they can prescribe policy which is one size fits all. Yeah. And that doesn't work anymore. It was never logical to begin with. And this has found political expression over the last particularly 2 decades.
And how much is this electorally relevant now, what you're saying?
So, one of the arguments that is made against coalition politics is that it is bad for governance because there is too much
exactly. This is what dialogue. The businesses constantly make this argument.
But I wish to point out, that every government for the last 24 years, every single government for the last 24 years, even Narasimha Rao's government was a coalition government.
Sure, it was a minority government.
And nobody will,
91 reforms happened under a minority
nobody will dispute that in this quarter century, India has done significantly better than in the previous quarter century.
Exactly, yeah.
When you had single party rule, when they had all the choices at their disposal, they could not or did not take those steps. My point is this. You cannot run India in a centralized, remote manner. It is too big, it is too diverse, and contrary to some opinion, this regionalism has actually been largely very good.
But why do businesses, Jay, this is what I am very puzzled, why do businesses constantly express a phobia of a coalition system of governance?
Now, if you talk to the businesses and you ask them about coalitions, you ask them, why are they excited about Bihar? That is part of a coalition. Why are they excited about Odisha, which is growing at nearly 10%? You know, it's not part of this government. Why are they excited about Gujarat?
Exactly, yeah.
So businesses are actually upset with the center, not with some of the states which are allegedly run by coalition partners who don't understand economics. That's not true, because these states are doing much better than the Indian average. I'll tell you what it is. Nobody complained much about coalition government when India grew. It went from 5% growth rate to more than 9% growth rate under coalition governments, because coalitions were managed better, at least under Mr. Vajpayee. Now, in the last several years...
Before that, under Narasimha Rao was reasonably managed better.
Now, exactly. Now, in the last several years, coalition management has fallen out of way.
Is it that communication is kind of ceased, or there's been
communication is a major problem, but I think the major problem is there is a mindset still and the top echelons of politics in the current dispensation. You know, many of the top leaders today,
the top-down mindset,
many of the top leaders today, they cut their political teeth before 1991, before a coalition era, before 1989 actually. Okay, yeah. And the mindset seems to be that, okay, we won an election, now we are not answerable, we can do what we wish for the next 5 years. That doesn't work anymore in any modern democracy. And in a coalition era in India, it doesn't work. You know, when President Obama has to announce a new policy, or Chancellor Angela Merkel, or Prime Minister David Cameron, they have to do a lot of work behind the scenes to sell their policies to allies and also to opponents and to the public.
Yeah.
Now, the government for many years had forgotten this basic Raj Dharma, that just because you win an election, you can't just impose your policies. You have coalition partners to sell your ideas to. You have the public to sell your ideas to. You have your opponents to sell your ideas to. So yes, communication had collapsed. I think some efforts are now going on to revive this. The fact is, politics requires constantly selling your ideas. You can't do that if the top leadership is mum, if they don't speak to the media, if they don't speak to the public.
There's one feeling, Jay, that the Prime Minister's personality, Manmohan Singh's personality, is quite affable, accommodative. He doesn't come across purely personality-wise as somebody who's trying to ram something down the throats of coalition partners. So what is wrong with really with the Prime Minister? Why is he so incommunicative?
Well, first of all, I think you must give credit to the Prime Minister back in the days when he was Finance Minister. He was part of the leadership which brought about this economic reform, revolution and growth to the country. But in the current role, I think many people would argue that the Prime Minister's role itself has been diminished because there is a different structure today. The Prime Minister is not the one who led his party in the elections. There are other people involved. So perhaps there is a split role, perhaps that has something to do with it. But nobody would argue that the Prime Minister is not a gentleman. But that's not it. Apart from being
not enough.
Apart from that may be necessary, but not sufficient. You know, I remember 10-12 years ago when I was first an MP, the then Prime Minister would have regular tete-a-tetes with allies, with opposition, a lot of back channel discussions. I'm talking about Vajpayee ji. You know, even I as a junior member of Parliament 10-12 years ago used to be sussed out. What is my personal view? What is my party's view? Repeatedly on various issues. And so anytime they had a policy in mind, they knew what would fly, they knew what would not fly, and they knew where a little cajoling or a little bit of give and take would make a policy fly.
So it's much more participative. It's very interesting. We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a very interesting conversation with J. Panda, Member of Parliament from Odisha. Jay, you were talking about Vajpayee's style of functioning. Now, if I recall correctly, even during NDA's period, it was not a very smooth sailing, although Vajpayee did make huge effort to reach out to people, but he had problems with AIDMK to begin with, and then later DMK and some other partners. There was, especially towards the end of a 5-year term, one sees in a coalition government, natural anti-incumbency develops, so people start detaching themselves or distancing themselves. That's happening now. Now, how does this dynamic work? I mean, in your experience?
If I were to hazard a guess, I would say out of Vajpayee ji's entire agenda, I think about 60% of the economic agenda did get implemented. As opposed to today, where barely 5% of the government's economic agenda is getting implemented. So there is a huge difference in what actually got.
So relative success of Vajpayee was far
60% of an agenda getting implemented, I think stands alongside the best of any government anywhere in the world, any democratic government. But I want to make a point here. There was a major shift in the Indian economy because starting in the late 1990s, you had this shift towards infrastructure. The Golden Quadrilateral project and the Prime Minister's Village Roads project, the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, to my mind, are the two biggest contributors to wherever the economy is today in terms of growth, because they have connected rural India to the rest of India and they have made mobility throughout India a possibility. Now that was a huge, I would say, not just a policy change, a mindset change, because as today, for many decades before the late 1990s, the whole attitude was that we have to have social spending, but the infrastructure was neglected. The reality is, in a democracy, you need to do both. You do need to have social spending so that people don't fall into, below the net.
And infrastructure is empowering economically.
You cannot grow an economy, you cannot even stabilize an economy unless you are investing in infrastructure, which has got a boost in the late 90s, but for many years we dropped the ball.
In Orissa, what's your experience with road projects like village roads, etc.? Has it created a big economic kicker?
The village roads have been hugely successful, not just in Odisha, but all over the place. Because, particularly in places like Odisha, where we have a lot of rain and flooding, villages used to get cut off during the monsoon. So for 3 to 4 months, they were not part of India, because vehicles couldn't go. If somebody got sick, they couldn't go to the nearest hospital, because they were living surrounded by lots of mud and swamps. Only in the dry months could they traverse. Now today, a large part, the majority of the villages today have concrete roads. And as a result, these large parts of the population are connected to the Indian economy. What happens is, farmers are no longer able to be exploited as much as before, because earlier, if you don't have physical connectivity, a middleman has huge leverage. Middleman can pressurize you to sell your produce.
Connectivity has brought down the leverage of the middleman. Okay.
The farmers today have access to the markets, both by way of having cell phones. Everybody today has a cell phone. Also physically, if they see that the price is good 20 kilometers away, they can go there any time of the year.
So you're seeing that the farmers are getting empowered, right?
I am seeing rural empowerment, not just in farmers, but by many other sections of society, even landless labor today. Today their earnings are significantly higher. As a result, there is significantly higher purchasing power. Some of these are due to some social programs, such as subsidized rice, which our state government provides, or NREGA, which the central government provides. But
so NREGA is working well in Orissa?
NREGA has, all over the country, contributed to rural incomes rising, but it's a leaky program. I think you've found many examples where NREGA has been misused, where the funds have not actually reached landless labor. So it's a leaky program. I think.
So would you want, as you said, would you want to do NREGA in a different way? I mean, would you want freedom to do? Isn't that one of the issues that you spoke about, that all these centrally sponsored schemes are designed in such a way that you don't have flexibility in doing it differently? Now,
I think all programs need to be done in a different way.
How would you do it differently? How would you do NREGA differently?
Well, first of all, I support such programs such as UID and Aadhaar, because you have a situation where, if you remember the famous saying in Rajiv Gandhi's time, that out of every rupee spent, the citizen only gets 15 paisa. The latest studies show that that has improved, but not by much. Today, only 27 paisa reaches the citizen out of every rupee spent.
And so a lot of it is administrative expenses also. It's not entirely corruption. No, you're right.
It's, corruption is a big part of it.
It's a big part of it, yeah.
But also administrative expenses.
Even United Nations, they say, for every dollar spent, it's about, 60 cents is their administrative expenditure.
So whether it is administrative expense or corruption, and both have a big part, it's irrelevant to the citizen who is still struggling to make a living. The point is, we need to deliver that to the citizen. And for that, the governmental approach needs to change.
So you agree with the the direct benefit transfer idea in the schemes that you would want to implement in Odisha?
In principle, we are agreeable with it. We need certain building blocks to be in place. The problem is, Odisha has a very, very poor banking network. Now, entire blocks.
That's the precondition.
I'm coming to that.
Accounts,
not necessarily. Entire blocks do not have banks at all. Now, if you are going to again distribute cash through officers, hands of government officers, local touts are going to take over. So you need to have.
What about banking correspondents taking mobile
Precisely.
ATMs?
So the micro ATMs that are being talked about are still at a very preliminary stage. Either you need to have bank branches, very easily accessible, or you need to have these mobile micro ATMs. Robust and working in every place.
But Jen Nilekani tells me that 1 million micro ATMs will be ready to be taken to the villages by 2014 end.
So we'll be happy with that. So I have talked to Nandan Nilekani about this, and this is exactly what he's told me. We support that. Like I said, these building blocks need to be in place, because otherwise it remains in theory that the benefits will directly go to the citizen, and in practice it will not happen. So as I said, in principle I support it, but you do need to have that in place. Now, if you say that that's going to be ready by the end of 2014, then you really should not be talking about cash transfers in 2013. You should wait until the end of 2014 to make it happen properly.
Yeah, sure.
and not just make it a political gimmick. It's a real game changer. Treat it as a real game changer with no political gimmickry involved.
Okay. Well, there's a charge that the government is using direct transfer, cash transfer as political game, but the Congress, the UPA says that it's in continuum. It's been happening for a while. So, so I don't know where.
Let me just say that cash transfers happen at state level also. Many states have cash transfers for certain things in smaller schemes. The point is, everybody agrees that the delivery mechanism to the citizen has to improve. And as I said, let me repeat, we are in principle very much in favor, Odisha government is in favor, but we are insisting that you have the building blocks in place.
And Jay, what is the tribal population in Odisha? What percentage is it?
It's about 10 million. It's about 25% of the population. So that's a huge, you know.
And how much of this would have banking access, this population?
Very, very minimal. So you know, in my constituency.
So it would be a priority for you to make, give banking access to tribals, take micro ATMs there, right?
Yes, you take micro ATMs, you have telebanking. Today, cell phones are accessible everywhere. Yeah. Whichever method that is rolled out on the ground and goes through the initial teething troubles and becomes a robust system. But until that is there, it's just talk.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jay, for talking to us, and let's hope you have much more participative kind of interaction with the center, and you get to sort of rework all these big schemes. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back again with you soon. Thanks for watching.